That morning, I wasn't searching for evidence. I wasn't even suspicious. Not really, or at least that's what I told myself. I just wanted my lucky shirt, the faded blue button-up, the one that always seemed to smooth over life's rough edges, was the first thing that came to mind when I woke up. Funny enough, it wasn't in the closet. I found it crumpled in the corner of the bedroom, tossed aside like an afterthought. It was one of those I'll get to it later piles that Emma, my wife, usually avoided like the plague. She hated that shirt, always calling it boring. But as I picked it up, a faint trace of cologne hit me, sharp and unmistakable. Except it wasn't mine. And I hadn't worn that shirt in months. Turning it over in my hands, a thought struck me. Adrian, Emma's colleague. His cologne always smelled annoyingly similar to mine, like a cheap knockoff you'd find at a gas station. The thought wormed its way into my mind before I could stop it. Could it be him? This wasn't the first red flag, far from it. Lately, Emma had been different. The way she smiled at her phone, glancing over her shoulder like she had something to hide. The work calls she always answered in the other room. The long nights she claimed were for deadlines, but came home smelling faintly of wine and something warmer. But the shirt, this felt like someone leaving a calling card at the scene of a crime. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't questioning myself. I wasn't second-guessing the cracks in her stories or convincing myself that I was paranoid. No! The shirt confirmed it. I wasn't crazy. Now the only question was, what was I going to do about it? Confrontation would be too easy, too simple. I needed answers, and Emma's smooth, practiced lies wouldn't cut it. She could spin stories out of thin air. I needed something solid, something she couldn't talk her way out of. So I went into full-on detective mode. You'd be surprised how much you can learn when you have access to someone's iCloud account. It didn't take long to connect her phone to mine. A few minutes scrolling through her texts and GPS history, and the whole thing unraveled like a cheap sweater. Her messages to Adrian made my stomach turn, inside jokes, double entendres, and even a few I miss you texts sent late at night when I thought she was at work. The worst part was the calendar entries. She hadn't even bothered to hide them. Their meetups were listed as client consultations, dinner at that trendy Italian place downtown, drinks at the bar we used to go to before we were married. And then there it was, the cabin. Adrian had booked a working retreat at some secluded spot in the woods. Emma had even marked the weekend on our shared calendar as a book club retreat. The irony was almost laughable. Emma had never read anything longer than a blog post. The cabin was the last straw. It wasn't just a meeting spot. It was a fantasy carved out of the life we'd built together, repurposed for their convenience. And they were leaving today. It was all right there in the messages. Adrian bragging about the fireplace and the rustic charm. Emma promising to bring plenty of wine. She was going to kiss me goodbye and drive straight to him. I stared at the phone screen, the weight of it pressing down on me like a lead blanket. And then something shifted in my mind. A smile crept onto my face. Not out of happiness, not even out of anger. It was colder, sharper. They wanted a romantic getaway. I'd make sure it was one they'd never forget. I remembered how Emma kissed me goodbye that morning, her lips brushing my cheek with casual affection. It felt more like a habit than love. "I'll be back Sunday night," she said, her smile forced but polite. "Don't forget to water the plants." I nodded, keeping my face carefully neutral. Of course. Have fun with the girls. For the briefest moment, her smile faltered, a crack in the mask. She turned quickly, grabbed her overnight bag, and walked out the door without another word. Once she was gone, I grabbed my jacket and headed to the garage. I'd done my homework. Her phone's GPS had already pinged the location of the cabin. I drove there in silence, my thoughts a storm of cold clarity. The cabin was tucked away off a quiet back road, surrounded by nothing but trees and empty space, perfect for team-building exercises or betrayal. When I arrived, I parked my car a little way off and crept closer. Through the trees, I saw the cabin, a quaint little thing with a wraparound porch and tall windows. Cozy and picturesque. The kind of place Emma used to say we should rent for a weekend, back when she still talked about us. As I approached, I saw them together on the porch. Emma and Adrian laughing. Even better. I'll surprise them when they come back, I whispered to myself as I quietly entered the cabin. From my bag, I unpacked a small collection of props I had brought along to set the stage. Methodically, I worked to arrange everything with a precision that felt oddly therapeutic. By the time I was done, the cabin resembled the opening act of a sinister play, a scene they were about to step into for the most unforgettable night of their lives. When Emma and Adrian arrived, the cabin was dimly lit. A single lamp cast a warm, soft glow in the corner. On the counter, a bottle of red wine sat beside 2 glasses, the corkscrew already laid out, as if inviting them to toast. Soft instrumental jazz hummed faintly from the Bluetooth speaker. The kind Emma always claimed was soothing. Emma froze in her tracks, tilting her head as she took in the scene. "What the?" she whispered. Adrian stepped in behind her, his brow furrowing. "Did you do this?" he asked, glancing at her. Emma shook her head slowly, her eyes darting around the room. "No, I thought you might have." Before Adrian could respond, I stepped into the doorway, shutting the door behind me with a deliberate click. The sound echoed through the quiet cabin like a gunshot. "Welcome," I said, my voice calm and conversational. I raised a glass of wine, my addition to their little celebration, and gave them the faintest of smiles. "I thought I'd join you for this special occasion." Emma's face drained of color as she stood frozen. Adrian turned to me, his jaw tightening, his eyes flickering to the door behind me. "Nathan," Emma stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here?" I ignored her question, letting silence settle heavily over the room. Slowly, I set the glass of wine down on the counter and took a step forward. "You know," I began, my tone still conversational, "when you've been with someone long enough, you start to notice patterns. Changes. Little things that don't quite add up." I looked directly at Emma, holding her gaze as she shrank back slightly. "And then there are the big things," I added, glancing at the wine bottle and the carefully set scene around us. "Things like this." Adrian finally spoke, his voice steady but laced with nerves. "Look, man, we can explain." "Shut up," I snapped, my calm demeanor cracking for the first time. His mouth snapped shut as I turned my attention back to Emma. "Let's skip the part where you insult my intelligence by pretending this isn't what it looks like," I said, my voice cold and deliberate. "Because I know everything." Emma's hands trembled as her bag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor. "Nathan, please, just—" "I'm not finished." I cut her off, my voice ice cold. Taking another step forward, I let the weight of everything unspoken press down on the room. "Tonight," I continued, "we're going to clear a few things up." The tension was suffocating. Emma stood frozen near the couch, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Adrian edged closer to her, his hand twitching, unsure whether to shield her or make a run for the door. Neither option would save him. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a thick folder and slapped it onto the coffee table. The sharp sound made Emma flinch. Adrian just stared at it, his face pale. "Go ahead," I said, nodding toward the folder. "Take a look." Emma hesitated, her trembling hands hovering above the cover. When she finally opened it, her eyes darted over the contents. Screenshots of their messages, candid photos of them together at restaurants, timestamps, GPS logs. I had even included a printout of the cabin reservation confirmation under Adrian's name. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Nathan, I can explain." "No," I said firmly, cutting her off. "You can't. And even if you could, I wouldn't want to hear it." I turned to Adrian, who was visibly sweating now. "And you," I said, my voice dropping a notch. "Impressive work booking this place on the company card. I'm sure HR will be thrilled to hear about this little retreat." Adrian stammered. I didn't mean for this to. Save it, I snapped. You think I care about your excuses? This isn't about what you meant. It's about what you did. Emma broke in, her voice desperate and pleading. Nathan, please. We can work through this. It doesn't have to end like this. I laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the room. Work through this? Do you even hear yourself? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, and now you want to play the victim? No, Emma. There's no working through betrayal. I stepped closer to the fireplace, picking up a bottle of whiskey. The amber liquid gleamed in the firelight as I held it up, examining the label as if considering a drink. Adrian found his voice, though it was shaky. What do you want, man? Money? An apology? Just tell me what you want. I turned to him, letting a small, cold smile spread across my face. What I want, I repeated, as if the question genuinely surprised me. I walked to the fireplace and tossed the whiskey bottle into the flames. The liquid inside burst into an intense blaze, lighting the room with flickering chaos. Emma and Adrian jumped back, their eyes wide with panic. What I want, I said, my voice calm despite the fire roaring behind me, is for both of you to remember this moment. Every time you think about lying, cheating, or betraying someone, I want you to hear the crackle of this fire, I said quietly, and wonder if the next person you mess with will let you go. The silence in the room was broken only by Emma's muffled sobs and the steady crackling of the fire. Adrian stood frozen, his eyes darting between me and the door like a cornered animal. I could see his fight or flight instinct warring within him. He wasn't brave enough to fight, and fleeing wasn't an option I was going to give him. You know, I began, breaking the tension. I spent a lot of time thinking about this moment, how it might play out, what I might say. But I've always believed actions speak louder than words. I stepped closer, towering over the coffee table where the folder still sat open, its contents damning. Adrian flinched as I leaned down, my voice dropping to a near whisper. And tonight, Adrian, I want you to understand something very clearly. Actions have consequences. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like it might choke him. What do you mean? He stammered. I straightened and gave him a cold smile. I mean, Claire, that's your wife's name, isn't it? Adrian's face went ashen, the blood draining so fast I thought he might faint. What did you do? I let the question hang in the air for a moment, savoring the panic in his voice. Oh, nothing drastic, I said lightly. We just had a little chat earlier today. She's quite the conversationalist, by the way. Smart, funny, and incredibly forgiving. At least at first. Adrian staggered back, his hands gripping the couch for balance. You told her? Oh, I told her everything, I said, my tone as calm and sharp as a knife's edge. And do you know what she said? She thanked me. Can you believe that? Thanked me for saving her from wasting another minute of her life on a lying, cheating fraud like you. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Nathan, stop, she pleaded. This isn't. I turned to her with a glare that made her flinch. Fair. I snapped. You think you're in a position to lecture me about fairness? She shrank back, her tears streaming freely. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. We can fix this. I shook my head slowly. No, Emma. You broke this. And now you get to live with the pieces. Turning back to Adrian, my voice sharpened. And you, Adrian, I've already sent the proof to your company's HR department and your boss. Oh, and as a bonus, I may have mentioned the cabin and the company card. Something tells me fraud investigations aren't good for climbing the corporate ladder. Adrian's mouth opened, then closed again. His shoulders sagged under the weight of my words. He knew he was finished. I walked to the chair where I draped my jacket earlier and slipped it on with deliberate ease. I think we're done here, I said, heading toward the door. Just as I reached it, I stopped and turned back one last time. "Oh, by the way," I said over my shoulder, "the police will probably come by in the morning." My gaze flicked to Adrian. "You might want to see a lawyer." Emma's eyes widened in fresh panic. "What do you mean? What did you do?" I smirked but didn't answer, stepping outside into the cool night air and closing the door behind me with a satisfying click. Emma's frantic cries and Adrian's muttered curses were muffled by the thick wood. I paused for a moment to savor the crisp, quiet night. The stark contrast of the storm I'd left inside. But it wasn't over. Not for them. Leaning against the side of the cabin, I pulled my phone from my pocket. One final touch. I opened the app connected to the Bluetooth speaker inside, queuing up a new track, a haunting, slow melody. It was a piece Emma used to play during her reflective moments. This wasn't just music. It was a message, something to gnaw at their nerves long after I was gone. For a few seconds, I stayed there, imagining their reactions. Adrian pacing, trying to piece together the wreckage of his personal and professional life. Emma sobbing, flipping through the folder again and again, as if rereading the evidence might somehow change its truth. Both of them trapped, not by locks or threats, but by their own actions. Their betrayal had become their prison, and I was its architect. As I walked back to my car, I felt light. No rage, no sorrow, no aching knot in my chest. I felt free. When I reached the car, I paused, leaning against the roof and glancing back toward the cabin. For a brief moment, I considered driving off into the night without a second thought. But leaving loose ends wasn't my style. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd saved earlier. It rang twice before a familiar, sharp voice answered. Detective Reynolds. "Hey, it's Nathan," I said, keeping my tone casual. "You remember that tip I gave you about the potential fraud case? The one involving misuse of corporate funds?" There was a pause, followed by the sound of rustling papers. "Yeah, I remember. You said you'd follow up with details." "Well," I said, a small smile forming, "I've got all the evidence you need now. Documents, GPS data, even correspondence. And the location where it all ties together? A cabin just outside of town." I rattled off the cabin's address. On the other end of the line, Detective Reynolds hesitated, his voice lowering. "Nathan, this is personal for you, isn't it?" I smiled faintly, appreciating his sharp instincts. "It was," I admitted, "but now it's about accountability. People like them think they're untouchable. I'm just leveling the playing field." "Understood," he replied. "We'll take it from here." I hung up, slipping my phone back into my pocket. The weight of the conversation sat comfortably on my shoulders. Adrian's career was over, and the fraudulent use of the company card would only add fuel to the fire. As for Emma's complicity in his schemes, that was for her to explain when the time came. Sliding into the driver's seat, I flicked on the headlights, illuminating the dirt path ahead. I took one last look at the cabin in the rear-view mirror, the faint strains of music still audible through the walls. Then I drove off into the darkness. By morning, the police would arrive, armed with everything they needed to start pulling at the threads. Emma and Adrian would wake up to a world unraveling, every choice they made crashing down around them. As for me, I'd be long gone, already writing the next chapter of my life. There were no loose ends. The drive home felt different. For the first time in months, the tension in my chest was gone. No more second-guessing. No more replaying Emma's lies in my head. I rolled down the window, letting the crisp night air fill the car, and took a deep, unhurried breath. It was over. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the first hints of dawn were creeping over the horizon. The house loomed in the soft light, familiar yet foreign. It had been our home once, filled with laughter and plans for the future. Now, it was a symbol of everything Emma had destroyed. I stepped inside and was greeted by the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. It no longer twisted my stomach or made my heart ache. It was just a smell. Grabbing a trash bag, I moved methodically through the house, tossing things into it without hesitation. Her half-empty bottles of beauty products, the little trinkets she collected on trips she hadn't taken with me, and the framed photos that once captured our happiest moments. I paused at one photo, a candid shot of us at the beach. Her smile was radiant as she leaned into me. I studied it for a moment before dropping it into the bag. That version of us didn't exist anymore. Maybe it never had. By mid-morning, the house was scrubbed clean of her presence. I didn't feel triumphant or bitter, just free. I'd spent so long trapped in the wreckage of our marriage that I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe. Now, I could finally start fresh. I made a cup of coffee and carried it out to the porch, watching the sun climb higher into the sky. The warmth on my face felt like a promise. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. Emma and Adrian would wake up to the mess they'd made, their lives unraveling piece by piece. But I wouldn't be there to see it. I didn't need to be. I had my closure, and I wasn't about to let their chaos define me anymore. As I sipped my coffee, a faint smile tugged at my lips. Let the past burn, like whiskey in a flame. The future was mine to write.